Great, well thank you very much for coming along. My name is Piers Messum. I work for a company called Pronunciation Science, and the name probably indicates that we take pronunciation very seriously. And I think I'd like to think that we take a principled approach to pronunciation. What I mean by a principled approach is we really do want to understand what the nature of English pronunciation is. And it's not what the books sometimes tell us. There is more to it than what the books say, or certainly the superficial accounts in the books. So we do want to understand exactly what it is. We want to understand how people learn pronunciation. And of course, there's the listen and repeat methodology out there, which we vehemently think is not the right way to go about it. So there's a job to be done in terms of understanding how people do learn pronunciation. And finally, when you've got those two things, there's another job to be done, which is turning that into ways of teaching, the exercises and the approach one's going to take in teaching. And those are the three things that we try to cover in pronunciation science. So today I'm going to be talking about stress reduction, but in the context of what makes a syllable prominent in English. So I'm going to come on to the main part of the talk in a moment. Before I start, I want to just do a little bit of historical background on two things. First of all, why is it that we haven't got this completely sorted out already? Because there are aspects of stress reduction which I found confusing when I got into this in the first place. So why isn't it absolutely clear for everybody already? And also, that's the first thing. And also, just a word about how people do learn pronunciation, because that will then you'll then understand the rest of the talk more clearly if you have a little bit of background in our feelings about this. And I should say, I work with Rosalind Young, who is at the back there by the camera. And so when I say our, it's me and Rosalind who I'm talking about here. Okay, so let's start off just by giving you a little bit of background to this. If you look at a very broad-brushed history of phonetics, there's pre-World War II, and then the sort of the 1950s onwards. In the first half of the last century, by necessity, phonetics was an introspective type activity. Phoneticians were very sensitive to what they did with their mouths, and that was great for language teachers. You know, we could use the sorts of things phoneticians were producing were very usable in language teaching. And then in the 1950s, sound recording equipment became very cheap, sound analysis equipment, sound spectrograms and things came in, and suddenly phonetics moved from being what's on the left-hand side of this diagram over into being dominated by acoustic phonetics, which seemed to be more scientific, because you could take measurements and produce readings and all the rest of it there. And something was lost for us as language teachers in that process. Well, for two reasons. Firstly, a big muddle was created, and one big muddle was that in the 1950s and 60s, experiments were done on the nature of stress from an acoustic point of view. They were done in London at University College by a man called Fry. And unfortunately, he muddled up the two middle things in that diagram, the acoustic and the psychoacoustic. So, on the acoustic side, we can objectively say that a sound signal has volume, duration, frequency, and spectral balance. But that's not the same as what actually we interpret as having human ears and human minds. What we listen to, what we hear is loudness, length, pitch, and timbre, and there isn't a one-to-one correspondence between these things. And he made the mistake of thinking that by turning up the volume dial, he was actually increasing the loudness of the signal, and the two aren't the same thing. Anyway, he did these very influential experiments. As a result, people got very muddled about stress, because his results seemed to say that loudness was not an important part of stress, at least from an acoustic point of view. And everybody started thinking, well, what is stress all about? Anyway, this was sorted out over the last 20 years in phonetics. So in the 1990s and in the last decade, people finally sorted it all out from a phonetic point of view. And from an acoustic side, it's very clear that loudness is the major cue to stress, and length and pitch changes happen on stress syllables as well. However, it's great that the phoneticians have now sorted that out. However, it's still not, in my contention or in our contention, what we need as language teachers. Because just knowing what the cues for stress are implies that we're going to get, or would feed into a model of listen and repeat, which is sort of the lowest common denominator way in which pronunciation teaching is done around the world. And the problem with listen and repeat is, in our contention, it just doesn't work. You know, you either provide a model or you play a tape recording. First of all, at least half the class can't hear or don't hear what it is that you're trying to bring their attention to. The next half of what remains of the class produce something which is completely inadequate. And even the people who get it, let's say that a few people in the class produce something, copy you or copy the model, and produce something vaguely accurate as a result of this exercise, they then walk out of the class and they've got nothing to carry away with them. You know, when they're out in the real world, they haven't got a model to copy instantaneously. So what happened is they walk out and they haven't got the tools with which to carry on their pronunciation learning. And one thing which is absolutely clear is that you don't learn pronunciation in the class. You learn pronunciation by doing the practice after the class. You know, there's no class could have enough time in it to learn the pronunciation of the language. What we have to give our students in the class is how they can go out and practice. And what we have to give them is the actual actions, because actions are physical things which you can carry out of the class, and you know you're doing them when you're outside and speaking or practicing or walking along the river or sitting in the bus and babbling. We need to teach our students what it is they have to do to pronounce English. So that's the background to this talk. But what this talk is really about is stress reduction.